for the bread, stay for the politics. I'm Ben Walsh, and this is Let's Meet Bread. This week on Let's Meet Bread, I am super happy to share with you a recipe for Bazlama, a Turkish bread. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our yeast mixture. I have some water here. It's about 105 degrees. And I have 2 tablespoons of yeast. Now I'm doubling this recipe, but I'm going to give instructions for as if you're making a single version of this recipe. So for everything except the yeast, if you're doubling it, you'll see me putting in twice as much, but you'll see me putting in twice as much, but I'll be giving a recipe for 1 serving. So this is going to be you're going to have about 150 milliliters of water, and we're just going to put our yeast. We're just going to put our yeast on top of here. Now, the recipe doesn't call for it, but I have actually included just a pinch of sugar. I find that adding sugar to yeast is a helpful way to make sure that your yeast is actually active. So let's get a fork real quick and just fluff this real quick. And so, just like we do every week, I'm going to do a nice little round motion in here, just trying to get the yeast a little bit mixed together. Remember, it's not going to come together all the way. That's all right. All right, so by the way, if you get yeast that sticks like this, just take your fingers. Your hands are clean, I'm sure. And you're just gonna let it go in there. All right, so we're gonna let that sit for 5 minutes. While we take care of some other stuff. Ooh, I got some extra yeast here. It's just, come on, in you go. Look alive, yeast. All right. Sorry about that. So the next thing we are going to do while we're letting this, forgot to cover it. So we're going to cover this and set it aside so that it can bloom. That's the way. I'm actually really excited to make this bread because when I traveled to Turkey, I actually had this bread a lot, but I had no idea what it was called. I definitely didn't know how to make it. So I'm really excited to take a crack at this and to make this bread. And actually what we're going to do with this bread, so typically this is like a dinner bread or a bread that you make and then eat right away. So what we're going to do in order to preserve it, because I think it's important that this show helps you make bread for an entire week. So part of the reason I'm doubling the recipe is so that I have enough of these, because one recipe makes 6, the 2 recipes I'm making will make 12. I'm going to make one of them on camera for you. I'm not going to make all 12 on camera. Once you see how it's done, you'll be able to replicate it, and I won't need to take any more of your time. But what we're going to do for this is I'm only going to show you how to dress one of them. And then every other one that I make, instead of dressing it in olive oil and herbs, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let it sit to the side and cool to room temperature. Once it's room temperature, what I'm going to do with it is I'm going to put it in a Ziploc bag, or if you can use plastic wrap or foil or whatever you want. Just make sure it's nice and tight and you can get some kind of air seal in there. And then I'm just going to set the bread aside, and then whenever I want it, what I'll do is I'll reheat it on the cast iron real quick, just hot enough so that it takes to the oil and spices. And then just as if you had made it just then, you'll just take your oil and spices, you'll paint it on just as if you had made it just then, and then it's fresh to eat as if you had just made it in that moment. But this way, you can save it for another time. Say you want to have Bazlama a couple days from now, you can make it now, just not dress it, and then just make sure that you can have a moment to reheat it on a hot skillet before you do that. Speaking of hot skillets, I have my cast iron out here. We're going to be using our cast iron to make one. I'm actually going to demonstrate how to make one of these on camera for you. Your cast iron will need to be very hot. That being said, if you have a fire alarm or if you have people who get nervous by high heat, you want to keep them away, and you want to make sure that your fire alarm is paid attention to. And if for some reason I have to run off camera or you hear a loud beeping, it's because my fire alarm will be going off. Unfortunately, it's very sensitive, so these recipes sometimes do set the alarm off. But we'll do our best to mitigate that and not have to worry about it. Yeah, so that's what we're going to do, and I'm very excited to make this with you. So let's see how our yeast is doing. I've got a really nice layer already. We got about 2 minutes left. Perfect. Okay. So what we're going to do now is I have 500 grams of flour here. I'm just going to put this in our bowl here. And we're going to combine this with our milk. Now, our milk needs to be room temperature. If your milk is right out of the fridge or you forgot to set it for room temperature, don't worry. Just put it in the microwave for about 20 seconds, okay? That's going to bring it to what about room temperature is. And luckily for this recipe, it doesn't really matter if your milk is warm. You just don't want your milk hot. Again, it really shouldn't change things, but it's important to have it at room temperature just to make sure there's no extra stuff going on with the chemistry. So I have 150 milliliters of milk here, and we're just going to pour this into our flour mixture here. Set this aside. All right, so the next thing that will go in is our yeast mixture, and it's looking pretty much done. So I think we're ready to take that out. So let me turn off the timer. And we have about 30 seconds left anyway. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take our yeast mixture, take the lid off, and we're going to pour it in here. Okay. So it should look kind of soupy at this point. Oops, don't want to. There you go. Bring it to the camera a little bit. You can see it's supposed to look a little soupy. That's okay. I've got it on a napkin here just so it's not touching our board. So let's get a wooden spoon. And we're just going to blend this together. So I'm using a folding motion. So I'm pushing the flour in and of itself, on top of itself. And I'm moving the liquid around in it so it all absorbs. So we're going to take this pretty slow, especially because I'm using a bowl that's pretty full right now, as you saw on the camera just a moment ago. And we're going to keep doing this till all the liquid is absorbed, and we'll add some other stuff a little later. Now, I try to be very careful with my measurements this week. I know usually I advocate that, like, oh, you can, it doesn't matter if there's a little extra here, a little extra there. This recipe is a little bit more of an exact science, so I've tried to be very careful with my ingredient amounts, and I hope you are too. All right. So just a little bit more. And by the way, if for some reason it's all sticking here, just get yourself a spatula or use your hands and push it off. So I'm going to get a spatula real quick, and we'll get back to going. Sorry, we'll get back to kneading. But you can see, even when it's sticking on the spoon there, that it's actually coming together quite nicely. So that's all right. It's okay if that's like that. So we'll just set this aside. We're likely to use it again. All right, so you can see now a nice shaggy dough has formed. That's nice, isn't it? Just move that around a little bit. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to pour in 3 tablespoons of olive oil. So I'm going to do this in 2 sets. All right, so this is going to add some liquid, but also some flavor. We're going to be using a lot of olive oil, so you definitely want to keep your olive oil out. We're going to use it for painting. We're going to use it to help rise. So that's the reason that in the shopping list this week, I didn't put an amount of olive oil. Because although we're putting 3 tablespoons in our yeast, in our dough, we're going to be using it for a lot of stuff. So important just to keep a good amount of it on here. The other thing we're going to do is we're adding salt, but again, the salt isn't a specified amount, so we're just doing it to taste. I'm going to put in about a tablespoon. This is approximately a teaspoon. Okay. So we've got that. Let's just move this around, and we're going to mix this around until pretty much it's a smooth dough. So the oil should help bring some of that liquid there, get our dough to incorporate nicely. And again, if things are sticking together, just take a second and move them off. Remember, we are also going to do a regular knead with this. We're going to do a regular test to make sure it's kneaded appropriately. But for now, we're just doing it in the bowl. And you're going to hear it squish a little bit. That's the sound of the oil. Nothing wrong with that. Now, in the recipe provided, they actually say to do the kneading in the bowl, but I don't like to knead in a bowl. I feel it's very restrictive. You can see here that I'm kind of running out of space. But also, more than it being restrictive, I find you just don't get as even as a knead on it. So this has mostly come together. You can see there's a little bit on the sides here, but for the most part, this is together. So what we're going to do now is other than clean our spoon, and we'll use this to clean our bowl off. Again, if you don't have a spatula like this to clean your bowl and your spoon off, just use your hands. You're baking this. It's going to be all right. All right, so let's move this here. And then I'm taking about an 8 cup of flour. Actually, a little less than that. I'm just going to lightly, very lightly, flour our board here. You'll see in a sec when I move the bowl. Actually, let me just move the bowl real quick so you can see. So see how lightly that is? It's just a very tiny little layer of flour. We can always add more, right? Start with a little bit. All right. So let's turn out our dough. Wonderful. Look how beautiful that's already looking. So we're going to knead this, and it's going to look so much better. But for now, it's still looking pretty good. I mean, it's come together quite nicely. And I think you're going to find that because we're using warm ingredients, warm room temperature ingredients, it's going to come together really well. So usually I'd tell you that if you're kneading, you can knead something to a certain temperature. So for example, 80 degrees is an optimal temperature for your bread to start to rise appropriately. This bread is actually already going to be that temperature, so that's not a reliable test. We'll need to use the window pane test for our kneading this time. So let's do it. Just rotate, right? Pull and push like we always do. And you'll see with your dough, and you can almost see a little bit in mine, that it's not that smooth. It looks like there's a lot of different textures going on. The whole point of this kneading process for this bread anyway is not to develop gluten, because we're not really worried too much about that. I mean, we want gluten development, but it's not a bread that relies on that because it's being cooked on a stovetop instead of in an oven. So really what we're doing here is we're just trying to make sure the dough is smooth and tacky. So in the recipe it says to do this for about 10 minutes. If you want, you can set a timer. Personally, I'm just going to kind of guess and check. I actually find that's a much better way of doing it. I feel like if you do it for a timed amount, you might over-knead or you might under-knead because you're just kind of confident that it works. You'll feel that your bread is ready. So I can feel in mine that there are still little chunks of flour and little chunks of salt, and it's definitely not smooth yet. But it'll get there. But you can see that it's tacky. It's not sticky, right? When I put my hand on it, I lift it up, it comes right off. So we're already in a good place for how it should feel on its surface. We just want to make sure now that the rest of it is feeling right. Now, if your dough doesn't look as big as mine, remember I doubled my recipe. I've got about a kilogram of flour in here, where you should have about 500 grams of flour, unless you also doubled your recipe. All right, so I've used up all the flour on my surface here, but I'm still not there yet. I'm pretty convinced. So let's get a little bit more flour. And same thing, light coating. And just keep going. It should feel nice, it should feel warm. If it feels smooth throughout, if you feel like everything's kind of incorporated, there's no more kind of craggles with your dough, then you probably know the drill at this point. Do a quick window pane test. If you don't know the drill at this point, what you're going to do with your bread, I'm not ready yet, so I'm not going to do it right now, but what you're going to do with your bread is you're going to roll it up into a ball, or as much into a ball as you can. Then you're going to take your thumb and forefinger, make an L next to the top of your ball. You're going to press in and press down on your dough, and you're going to take a little ball. You're going to squeeze it so that a little ball comes off the top, and then you're going to take that ball. You're going to smooth it out into a pancake using your thumbs and forefingers, and you're going to stretch it slowly but surely like you're making a pizza, and hold it up to a light source. The window is fine. A light bulb is fine. Just hold it up to something that emits light, and stretch it so thin that you can see the light coming through it. Now, if it doesn't break before that happens, then it's perfect, and you are ready to go. If it does break, it means you are not yet ready. You need to go back to kneading. You don't have enough gluten development yet. All right. So I actually think we are close. So what I'm going to do is our test, right? As I showed you, thumb and forefinger, squeeze that. Take our thumbs and forefingers, stretch it into a pancake, move it towards the light. Okay. And oh, we are breaking through. So you know what that means. We need to do more kneading. So we are not done yet. As you're kneading, especially with a dough like this that's already very supple, make sure you're getting nice long stretches so you're actually stretching the dough out. Making sure it's actually doing the work. So that you're actually doing the work to make sure that your dough is getting nice and glutinous. We want it to rise well, because we want to have enough for our 6, me for my 12. Make them into, and then we'll shape them together. And luckily, they don't rise as they shape. So I'm actually going to move the camera when we, after we do our politics section. And we're just gonna, shape them. Oh, sorry, I'll move the camera after we shape them. We'll move over to our cast iron, which I'll have preheating. And we'll go. We'll just go from there. We'll make one together. And after that, you guys can do the rest on your own. So I know this bread recipe is a very different type of bread recipe than we're usually doing. I'm just gonna add some flour real quick. If you have an exotic bread that you would like to make or have never made before, or just want me to make for you, send us a message. I'd love to hear from you. Or send a chat, right? Tell us that you're watching. And tell us what bread you'd like me to make. If you have a recipe that you want me to try, that you've either been afraid to try, or you just want to try with someone else, send it in. I'd love to make it. We are all about trying new breads here. The show is named Let Them Eat Bread after all. And also, if you feel that the way that I'm describing my recipes, isn't making it as accessible as they could be, please let me know. I'm more than happy to accommodate anyone who might need it. No puns intended on the needing. All right. So we're going to try this one more time. So I'm going to use the dough's inherent stickiness here, create a rough ball, stretch it out a little bit, take my thumb and forefinger, push down, squeeze a little ball off, and then take that ball, use my thumbs and fingers, make it into a nice flat pancake, stretching little bits all the while. You don't want to tear it, right? Because this is a delicate process. Oh, we might be there soon, guys. Let's take a look. Yeah, look at that. Lovely. All right, I can see the light coming through there. You can't see my face, but you can see the light a little bit, right? Coming through. Yeah. So this is done. So we're gonna roll it up to a ball like we always do. Hands like this, cupped underneath. We're gonna slowly let the dough ball own stickiness, turn it into a nice taut ball. All you're doing is letting the dough move itself back and forth here, so it's nice and taut. All right, we're almost there. You can actually see the ball is acting on me, is acting, staying more in one place, I guess is the right word. It's nice and taut on top. So I have a little bit of extra flour here, so I'm just gonna rub the flour on the bottom so this is easy to pick up. So the next step is to let this guy rise. So what we're gonna do is I have a glass bowl. As always, I'm going to warm my bowl a little bit just so the rise is a little bit better. If you do not have a glass bowl or using a bowl that stays more or less at room temperature, you're just going to plop this in. You're going to put some olive oil in your bowl. Just give it a nice quick coat, a very, very light coating. Use your hands, spread it around, and then we're going to roll our ball in it, plop it in, let it rise. So let's do it. And if you are rinsing your bowl, you just want to make sure you do it just till it doesn't feel cold anymore. You don't want your bowl to be that hot. Feel free to wash your hands while you're there. All right. Gonna wipe down our bowl. Really don't want it wet. We do want it warm though. So let's just give this a quick wipe down. And again, your bowl shouldn't be hot. It should just be warm or room temperature. All right. So we have our room temperature bowl. What we're going to do now, I'm going to put in a little bit of olive oil here. I'm just going to stir it around. If you find you need more, that's fine, but you should not need very much. You're really just doing a very basic amount of greasing on the bread. All right, so we got a little bit in there. If you have some pooling at the bottom, don't worry, you'll roll your bread in it. So let's take our bread, plop it in, kind of roll it once, and just make sure it's covered in olive oil. Again, this is just to make sure that nothing dries out as it rises, which is very important. If our bread dries out, it will no longer rise. So it'll form a little bit of a crust on it, and it won't rise at all. So we're now going to cover this and set a timer for an hour. So I'm going to cover it with a sheet of plastic and then a towel. I suggest you do the same. Obviously, if you have reusable plastic or you just want to use a towel, you can do that too. I use plastic and a towel to keep the heat in, to keep the heat nice and sealed in. But if you have reusable plastic wrap, or you have a lid or some other thing that will keep the heat in, use that instead. Obviously, we don't want to waste as much as possible. One thing I will say is that if you are using a lid, just don't close the lid all the way, or else halfway through your rise, your bread will explode. Your bread won't, but your lid will pop off because the yeast is eating the sugars of the flour and creating carbon dioxide, which creates air pressure, which pops this off. This is porous enough that it's not going to pop off. All right, so we're going to let that sit for 1 hour. Our bread has more than doubled in size. Look at this. Look how beautiful this bread is. Wow. Wow, this grew way more than I thought it would. Okay, this is great. Okay, let me wash my hands real quick because I've been touching a lot of stuff, and then we are going to roll this out. It's going to be great. I'm so excited, guys. So excited. Holy moly, can you see this, guys? This is amazing. This is so cool. All right, so we're going to take a tiny, tiny bit of flour, very, very, very tiny. I'm going to spread it very, very, very thin because we really don't want this making a ton of flour. So, yeah, we don't want a ton of flour to pick up on this because we want our dough to be nice and soft and delicious, and the flour will toughen it a little bit. All right. Wow, look at this. I know I keep saying that, but come on, guys. Isn't this beautiful? All right, so let's turn our bread out. Boop. Wow, look at that. Look at that. So what's nice about this recipe is it doesn't rise twice, so we can actually just start working on it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut mine into 12. You'll cut yours into 6, but the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just chop it in half. Now, typically, I would weigh these out, but quite frankly, I'm not going to do that. So, I'm just going to change this into a log, and I'm going to cut 6 pieces from it, and then we'll roll those out. So, let's just make these into nice logs here. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Perfect. All right, let's do it again. 1, oops, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so we have 12 of these. They look great. All right, so we're gonna put them on the side. I would actually roll them up into balls. Take this real quick. Roll them into balls. This is going to make them easier to roll out. You don't need to knead them. Can if you want to, but don't need to. Just make sure you got a nice little ball going on. It doesn't have to be pretty. All right. Because it will not matter once we put it on the heat. All right. Roll these up into a ball. Remember, we're going to flatten these guys out, so don't worry about if your ball is pretty or not. Some are a little bit bigger than others. That's okay. This one's gonna be a tiny one. That's all right. You know what? That's what we'll do. We'll make this one. You can see make a tiny one, and the rest on camera, and the rest of them we'll do. Other time. We are gonna cook them all now. I'm not gonna cook them all on camera, but you are gonna cook them all now. All right. So we've got our little ball here. Flatten it out a little bit, and we're gonna take our rolling pin. Put a little bit of flour on there. A little bit of flour on this guy. And we're just going to roll out. Okay, so these are going to be a little oily, right? So just make sure you got a nice little floured surface here. So just roll them out. You want to roll this nice and flat. You probably want this to be about 1/8 of an inch. You don't want it to be too floury. We are going to wipe off the excess flour. So if there is excess flour on yours, it's all right. So while we do this, let's preheat our cast iron. So let's do it over here. Actually, I'm not going to move the camera today. We'll just what we'll do is I will show it to you as I do it, and we'll go from there. All right. So you should see now you have a nice flat dough, right? Very, very nice. And so there should be a tiny, tiny bit of flour on it just to stop it from sticking to the board. It should be about 1/8 of an inch thick. Don't lubricate your surface. You don't need to do it. It's not going to stick. At least it shouldn't. You're going to want a pair of tongs to flip this. And you're going to want your paintbrush if you're using it. If you do not have a paintbrush to use, a spoon is great, or you just use your fingers. Recommend a spoon though. So this is going to get very hot. So while that's waiting, let's stack them on this plastic. Let's fold the plastic in. Yeah. Put it on here for now. We can move the next one. We can start doing the next one. A little bit of flour there. And again, you will wipe off all the excess flour. So if there's a lot of flour on here and it looks like you're going to have a lot of excess flour, don't worry about it. You're going to get rid of it. Let's move this out of the way. This will be a nice big one. Try and keep it a circle to the extent you can. If you can't, that's fine, but it'll be easier, especially since your skillet is probably round. Keep it a nice round shape. Just flip it over, let's move it around with flour. Remember, we are going to wipe off all the excess flour, so don't worry about it too much. All right, this is going to be a nice big one. So this will be great for a sandwich. This one, the little small one over there, will not be so great for a sandwich, but that's okay. We're making them different sizes. If you want them all to be the same size, that's fine. You probably would have had to measure them out. All right. So again, you want it to be just about 1/8 of an inch in size, and to kind of hold that roundish shape. If it sinks in a little bit, really not the end of the world. All right. So that's getting pretty hot. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take this. We're going to put it on our cast iron just until it starts to get a little bit of a crust on the bottom. Now's a good time to hit your fire alarm. You want to do that now. Sorry about the noise. So once you have a nice crispy bottom on here, and I'll show you what that looks like, we're going to flip it over. It'll expand a little bit. We're just going to cook it on each side for a couple minutes so it has that nice char on it. And it should start to bubble a little bit too. This will start to smell really nice, okay? So while it's going, I'm going to get a plate out so I can show you how I'm going to decorate the one I'm going to make on camera for you guys. All right, this is smoking. All right, you can see I have a little bit of color on it, but it's not done yet. So we're going to keep it on there. And I'll show you here once this is ready. So remember, you're using very high heat, so just make sure that you're checking on this often. You don't want it to get too dark, but you do want it to get kind of that nice brown color on it. And as soon as you have it there, you want to flip it over. All right, so you can see it got some nice brown color on it now. You can see. We're going to flip it over a couple minutes. And it should pop up a little bit. Don't worry about little black bits on it. The char is actually really, really tasty. And this is only going to need about 2 or 3 minutes on each side. So just keep watching it, and you'll see. And by the way, if it doesn't get to black, that's fine too. It doesn't need to be black to be cooked. Just make sure that it's nice, that you've got some nice brown bits on both sides, and that it no longer feels like dough when you're picking it up and flipping it. If you're worried that it's not done, let that brown cover a little bit more of your bazlama, and then once you do that, you'll know it's done. But even if you just have some nice brown on the outside, it's going to be okay. It'll still be cooked. All right, so I've got a little bit of black on mine. I'm going to turn my heat down just a little bit because the cast iron is very hot. The cast iron is great because it will stay hot once it has been made hot. So once you get that, once you've got it heated in there, it'll stay pretty hot, so you don't have to keep it on that super high heat the entire time. All right, so this is done. Look at the beautiful color on that. Isn't that gorgeous? All right, so, and if you tap on it, it'll feel kind of hard, right? It won't look like dough anymore. Gorgeous. So what we're going to do is we're going to decorate it. So I've got my piece of bazlama right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of our olive oil and just we're going to put a little tiny bit on there. It's a little too much, but that's all right. Don't worry about it. So if you're using a spoon, just use the back of the spoon. If you're using a paintbrush, just paint it a little bit. Flip sides, you can take some from here. If you put a little bit too much on, like me, just paint it back. You just want a nice little layer of olive oil on there. Nothing crazy. I put a little bit too much on, so just pour slowly, but this isn't exact science. There's no perfect amount to put on there, okay? So now we've done that, and by the way, this is looking delicious. Look at that. Look at that gorgeous olive oil sheen on there. All right, so the next thing we're doing is add our spices. As I said in the shopping list, I'm going to be using 4 delicious spices today. I'm going to be using some garlic powder. Let's put a little bit of that on. I'm using a little bit of onion powder. And all this is to taste, guys. You can put on as little or as much as you want. This is all about how you want it to look, how you want it to taste. Put some thyme on. Yeah, that's really beautiful right there. And then last but certainly not least, because some people in my life love to have some heat, I'm going to do chili flakes. Look at that. Look how beautiful that looks. Isn't that great? So this is going to be the end of our video. I've just shown you how to make it in your cast iron. I'm going to eat this off camera with my family here. But I highly encourage you to make the rest of yours as soon as you can. And remember, to save them, put them on a plate, set them aside, let them cool to room temperature. You can do it on a rack, you can do it on a plate, however you want. And then once they're completely cooled, put them in a Ziploc and store them in a bread bin or somewhere that doesn't fluctuate temperatures too much and is covered from the elements. And when you want to eat these during the week, what you're going to do is you're going to take your cooked ones, you're going to throw them on your cast iron for like a minute on each side, just enough so they get hot. And then you're going to do exactly what I just did. Paint it with olive oil, put on your favorite herbs and spices, and you'll have a delicious bazlama bread to eat. anytime you want. All right, guys, I will see you next week. Thank you so much for watching, and take care. Have a good one.